Before I begin my sermon this morning and before you start your clocks ticking, I want to ask you the question, do you really want to see Jesus? Or do you want to see the Jesus that the church has presented to you? The cuddly one? Or are you ready to see the whole Jesus? Today we begin a sermon series called The Scandalous Jesus, and it's based on a sermon series that our executive pastor, the Reverend Kevin Downer, has given before. And so the structure for the sermon and much of the content for the sermon is Kevin's. So as we go through this sermon series, if you like it, let me know. If you don't like it, let Kevin know. But I want to thank him for the structure and the content, much of the content. Dina and I have tried to make it our own, but there's some amazing stuff here through this series. Scandalous Jesus. So let's begin with a definition of scandalous. Causing general public outrage by a perceived offense against morality or law. You can understand why Jesus was labeled scandalous, because he consistently provoked public outrage when he challenged the morality and the laws of his day. A progressive Christian view of the life and the resulting death of Jesus takes the position that it was specifically because of the scandals that Jesus caused that resulted in the political occupiers and the religious fundamentalists of his day killing him. So this series will look at some of the ways that he was viewed as scandalous. What did he do that caused so much anger? How was he such a threat to the political leaders and the religious leaders? This series will challenge those of us who are attracted to the person Jesus to move beyond liking him, beyond celebrating his birth, beyond even lamenting his death, to really pay attention to what he said and what he did, and therefore what he calls us to say and what he calls us to do. Jesus called those first disciples not to worship him, but to follow him. Jesus called those first disciples not to worship him, but to follow him. And we'll begin today by looking at the Beatitudes, traditionally used to comfort people. And as important as that is, I think Jesus had something else in mind with these Beatitudes. Rather than a simplistic, comfy, cozy reading of the Beatitudes, this is an accounting of the cost of following him. The bottom line. And it is this: if we aren't getting into this kind of trouble, we aren't worth our salt. So the scandal begins. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus calls the disciples together and sits down with them to explain what it really means to follow him, what they were getting themselves into. Collectively, these sayings are known as the Beatitudes, but they are often taken as sound bites or platitudes. So enter Jesus. He proclaims that the dominion of God is near. We hear so much about the kingdom of God we'll experience someday, somewhere, sometime called heaven. But Jesus says it's to be here, right now, the dominion of God. He calls for us to work now for that dominion of God. By the way that we live our lives, by the way we vote and who we vote for, by where we work and what we work for, by what organizations we belong to, by what petitions we sign, what demonstrations we join. When we speak to politicians, to thank them or challenge them. To work to bring about this dominion of God now. Now, I don't disagree with the religious right, or more appropriately, the religious wrong. I don't disagree with the religious wrong being involved in public issues. I personally don't agree with some interpretations of the separation of church and state. I believe that people of faith should be speaking up. Where I strongly disagree with the religious right is their focus. Yes, be involved in the public policy sphere, but not in trying to legislate morality. Instead, try to ensure equality. Jesus declares liberation for all captive and oppressed people. That's political. And that was scandalous in his day. But not just in his day. Whenever, over the years, we address political issues, it's not uncommon for someone to come and say in an email or letter or handshake at the back, "Brent, you're getting too political." And my temptation is, well, tell Jesus that then. The problem isn't that the church is too political. The problem is that the liberal church, the progressive church, the moderate church is too silent, and we let the religious right be the only voice. Rejected by his people, his family, Jesus was undeterred. He shares over and over again a provocative vision of the way things could be, indeed should be. And every step of the way, he lives into that new vision. And so the movement grew. He gathered his followers to share this new perspective, what it means to follow. Yes, blessed are the meek. Yes, blessed are the poor in spirit. And blessed are the peacemakers and the justice seekers and those who are ridiculed and persecuted and reviled. Blessed are you, blessed are we in and through our messes and our mistakes. To really follow Jesus means that boundaries will be broken down. Conventions will crumble. Assumptions will be upended. And that we will need to rethink what we think is clean and unclean. What it means to be a temple goer or a pew sitter. What it means to share sacred space with the spiritually self-assured and the spiritually unsure. What it means to share sacred space for those who are raised in the church and those who don't trust the church. With someone who's fresh out of seminary and someone who is fresh out of jail. What it means to embrace those who have conservative sexual practices and those who embrace almost anyone for sexual play. Can we hold different perspectives while holding on to mutual respect? Letting go of old biases and old judgments. Think of it. Believers and skeptics, pious and outrageous, all gathered together in community. That is scandalous. Where the rich are welcomed and challenged to be generous. Where the poor are welcomed and challenged to be generous. Where 2 cents from a widow is held up by Jesus as an example of someone whose life is full of grace and gratitude and thanksgiving for what God means to her. And in another story where Jesus says that the place of love shown to a prostitute is valued over religious moralism. Well, some may call this scandalous, and they did. Others experience it as good news. Collectively, Jesus called the disciples together, and he had this come to Jesus moment with them, where he laid out what it means to follow him. And it may not be what you think. Jesus began his ministry by announcing that he is called to liberate the oppressed, economically, physically, spiritually, and socially oppressed. And this is a challenge for us to move beyond personal piety and personal belief into action, to actually follow. Are you willing to follow the rule-breaking, love-making, rabble-rousing, scandalous Jesus? Yes. Or do you simply want to sit and worship him? One of the scandals of the church today is that we have forgotten this calling to follow Jesus. We spend so much time on our knees praising him and worshiping him, we forgot that he called us to follow, both as individuals and as a community. And if we follow this way, too often it has been presented as a cute and cuddly Jesus, rather than the scandalous Jesus found in the Gospels. Author Brian McLaren says, we have domesticated Jesus, and this is a scandal. We've divided the sacred and the secular, the good, the bad, the right, the wrong, the in and the out. We belittle the Beatitudes, taking them out of context, and make them optional platitudes to placate the poor and appease the powerful. Toe the line. Keep your head down. Don't rock the boat. Oh, well, the poor will always be with us. That's just the way it is. But don't worry, aren't you really blessed anyway? Pious humility, devoid of justice, devoid of loving kindness, is not the way of Jesus. Following Jesus means adopting a whole new set of attitudes, perspectives, ways of being. It means that we too must take our spirituality into the political realm. We too must challenge political leaders. We too must challenge religious fundamentalism and traditional religious practices. Poet Tony Nalesco put it this way in his poem, Goodbye to the Margins. Very early on, I curled up into a fetal position and shut my eyes, thinking this world would do forever. But more time has passed, and these sleeping desires will no longer be denied. Something has caught up with me. So goodbye to this life on the margins. There is no other choice. No other choice now but to rejoice or die. No more days of just hanging in there instead of reaching for the stars. The pain of past hurts is my energy supply. The lessons of past mistakes is my compass. The mediocre will never do again. We have been initiated, and there is no turning back. We know what the sacred is, and it is everything. All the work is now gladly shared, and we take care of one another. There is no more time to do anything except thrive. No more opportunity for anything other than laughter. Can you see? He has spotted us. Can you see? Even from this great distance, his arms are open wide. Here is the foundation. Square one, cornerstone, starting point. Each one of us has something different to offer. And a congregation such as ours has the blessed opportunity to learn through our struggles and different perspectives, to learn and listen and see an even bigger God. This is our holy calling, to go where we need to go, to get in trouble as we tear down walls and build up hope. It is costly. It will get us in trouble. It means we are actually following this scandalous Jesus. And over the next few weeks, we'll take a look at what he did to be labeled so scandalous, turning over tables in the temple, eating with sinners, healing on the Sabbath. Down through history, God has consistently called people to risk scandal in order to right a wrong. You've heard me mention before the author Sue Monk Kidd. Her book that profoundly touched me years ago was called When the Heart Waits, and it was about her own journey in life and her own journey through depression, challenging people to look again at things that make you uncomfortable and to not run away from discomfort. In her latest book, The Invention of Wings, it's a novel about, it's partly a novel, but it's also based on the life history of a woman named Sarah Grimke, based on two women in the early 1800s in the southern U.S. in the midst of slavery. And while many of us know about slavery a bit, we kind of stand at the edge of it. But if you read this novel, you will be ushered into the devastation of it. It is hard to read. It's based on two women, and it goes back and forth with their stories. One, Sarah Grimke, a young white woman born in a rich plantation family in the southern U.S., and another, a young slave girl named Handful. She was given that name by her mother. Her slave master gave her her legal name, but her mother gave her the name Handful. And so the story of Sarah and Handful, back and forth as they merge and separate and merge. And on Sarah's 11th birthday, her mother called her into the parlor with the other ladies of the community to present her her birthday present. And typically, unbelievable, 11-year-olds were given 9- and 10-year-old slaves as their birthday present for their 11th birthday. And so Sarah grew up struggling with that. When she could barely write, she wrote a letter to set Handful free and was told that she wasn't allowed to do that. It took a vote in the legislature for someone to set a slave free. And so at 10 years old, Handful was taken from her mother and given a mat outside of Sarah's bedroom to sleep on so that she could be there at the beck and call of Sarah. And the story is of Handful and her mother Charlotte growing up and fighting against the system of slavery, of Sarah having awful guilt about it and trying to figure out what she could do to break away from this tradition. And she did eventually. It cost her her family. It cost her her respectability. It cost her the love of her life. She moved away, joined a liberal church, and even in that liberal church that supported abolition, she still found discrimination. The white people were told to sit in the front pews, and there was a pew at the back where blacks were to sit. And she hated this tradition, and one Sunday she and her sister decided they needed to sit in the back pew to break down those barriers. And she created a scandal, even in this so-called liberal church. I would ask you, where do you think Jesus would have sat in that church? Down through history, God has called people to risk scandal to right a wrong. What about Nigeria today? 4 young men, 18 to 20 years old, whipped this week because they loved each other. Yes, Jesus dealt with issues in his day, and now he's relying on us to deal with issues in our day. Jesus started his ministry by saying he was called to set people free. And throughout his ministry, he caused a scandal. Now it's our turn. Your turn. Maybe it'll be at work when you challenge a policy. Maybe it'll be when you take a social issue and organize around it. We now are called to set people free from minimum wage, from having minimum resources to raise their families, to set people free from being held back by not having affordable quality childcare so they can take the courses and go for the job they want, to set people free from illness when they're a refugee and Canada says no health care, to set people free from imprisonment, LGBT folks from imprisonment in places like Nigeria. And don't underestimate, to set people free from boring religion, from judgmental religion, to experience maybe for the first time faith that is vibrant, inclusive, and progressive. Will you follow this scandalous Jesus and make it so? Jesus said, I have come that you might have life and that you might have it more abundantly. Now he's saying, I have sent you so that other people might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. Will you follow this scandalous Jesus and make it so? Amen.